Section 6 of Farewell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Farewell by Honore de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 6. An icy shiver ran through Philippe de Sucy, and he dropped down where he stood, overcome with cold and sorrow and weariness. My poor niece went out of her mind, the doctor added after a brief pause. Ah, monsieur, he went on, grasping Monsieur d'Albon's hand, what a fearful life for the poor little thing, so young, so delicate. An unheard of misfortune separated her from that grenadier of the Garde, Fleuriot by name, and for 2 years she was dragged on after the army, the laughing-stock of a rabble of outcasts. She went barefoot, I heard, ill-clad, neglected, and starved for months at a time, sometimes confined to a hospital, sometimes living like a hunted animal. God alone knows all the misery which she endured, and yet she lives. She was shut up in a madhouse in a little German town, while her relations, believing her to be dead, were dividing her property here in France. In 1816, the grenadier Fleuriot recognized her in an inn in Strasbourg. She had just managed to escape from captivity. Some peasants told him that the Countess had lived for a whole month in a forest, and how that they had tracked her and tried to catch her without success. I was at that time not many leagues from Strasbourg, and hearing the talk about the girl in the wood, I wished to verify the strange facts that had given rise to absurd stories. What was my feeling when I beheld the Countess? Fleuriot told me all that he knew of the piteous story. I took the poor fellow with my niece into Auvergne, and there I had the misfortune to lose him. He had some ascendancy over Madame de Vandieres. He alone succeeded in persuading her to wear clothes, and in those days her one word of human speech, farewell, she seldom uttered. Fleuriot set himself to the task of awakening certain associations, but there he failed completely. He drew that one sorrowful word from her a little more frequently, that was all. But the old grenadier could amuse her, and devoted himself to playing with her, and through him I hoped. But here Stephanie's uncle broke off. After a moment he went on again. Here she has found another creature with whom she seems to have an understanding, an idiot peasant girl, who once, in spite of her plainness and imbecility, fell in love with a mason. The mason thought of marrying her because she had a little bit of land, and for a whole year poor Genevieve was the happiest of living creatures. She dressed in her best and danced on Sundays with Dallot. She understood love. There was room for love in her heart and brain. But Dallot thought better of it. He found another girl who had all her senses and rather more land than Genevieve, and he forsook Genevieve for her. Then the poor thing lost the little intelligence that love had developed in her. She can do nothing now but cut grass and look after the cattle. My niece and the poor girl are in some sort bound to each other by the invisible chain of their common destiny, and by their madness due to the same cause. Just come here a moment. Look." And Stephanie's uncle led the Marquis d'Albon to the window. There, in fact, the magistrate beheld the pretty Countess sitting on the ground at Genevieve's knee, while the peasant girl was wholly absorbed in combing out Stephanie's long black hair with a huge comb. The Countess submitted herself to this, uttering low smothered cries that expressed her enjoyment of the sensation of physical comfort. A shudder ran through M. d'Albon as he saw her attitude of languid abandonment, the animal supineness that revealed an utter lack of intelligence. "Oh, Philippe, Philippe!" he cried. "Past troubles are as nothing. Is it quite hopeless?" he asked. The doctor raised his eyes to heaven. "Good-bye, monsieur," said M. d'Albon, pressing the old man's hand. "My friend is expecting me. You will see him here before long." "Then is it Stephanie herself?" cried Sucy, when the Marquis had spoken the first few words. "Ah, until now I did not feel sure," he added. Tears filled the dark eyes that were wont to wear a stern expression. "Yes, she is the Comtesse de Vandieres," his friend replied. The colonel started up and hurriedly began to dress. "Why, Philippe," cried the horrified magistrate, "are you going mad?" "I am quite well now," said the colonel simply. "This news has soothed all my bitterest grief. What pain could hurt me while I think of Stephanie? I am going over to the Minorite convent to see her and speak to her, to restore her to health again. She is free. Oh, surely, surely happiness will smile on us, or there is no providence above. How can you think she could hear my voice, poor Stephanie, and not recover her reason?" "She has seen you once already, and she did not recognize you," the magistrate answered gently, trying to suggest some wholesome fears to his friend, whose hopes were visibly too high. The colonel shuddered, but he began to smile again with a slight involuntary gesture of incredulity. Nobody ventured to oppose his plans, and a few hours later he had taken up his abode in the old priory, to be near the doctor and the Comtesse de Vandieres. "Where is she?" he cried at once. "Hush!" answered M. Fanjat, Stephanie's uncle. "She is sleeping. Stay, here she is." Philippe saw the poor distraught sleeper crouching on a stone bench in the sun. Her thick hair, straggling over her face, screened it from the glare and heat. Her arms dropped languidly to the earth. She lay at ease, as gracefully as a fawn, her feet tucked up beneath her. Her bosom rose and fell with her even breathing. There was the same transparent whiteness as of porcelain in her skin and complexion that we so often admire in children's faces. Genevieve sat there motionless, holding a spray that Stephanie doubtless had brought down from the top of one of the tallest poplars. The idiot girl was waving the green branch above her, driving away the flies from her sleeping companion and gently fanning her. She stared at Monsieur Fanjat and the colonel as they came up. Then, like a dumb animal that recognizes its master, she slowly turned her face towards the Countess, and watched over her as before, showing not the slightest sign of intelligence or of astonishment. The air was scorching. The glittering particles of the stone bench shone like sparks of fire. The meadow sent up the quivering vapors that hover above the grass and gleam like golden dust when they catch the light, but Genevieve did not seem to feel the raging heat. The colonel wrung Monsieur Fanjat's hands. The tears that gathered in the soldier's eyes stole down his cheeks and fell on the grass at Stephanie's feet. "Sir," said her uncle, "for these 2 years my heart has been broken daily. Before very long you will be as I am. If you do not weep, you will not feel your anguish the less." "You have taken care of her," said the colonel, and jealousy no less than gratitude could be read in his eyes. The two men understood one another. They grasped each other by the hand again and stood motionless, gazing in admiration at the serenity that slumber had brought into the lovely face before them. Stephanie heaved a sigh from time to time, and this sigh, that had all the appearance of sensibility, made the unhappy colonel tremble with gladness. "Alas!" Monsieur Fanjat said gently, "do not deceive yourself, monsieur. As you see her now, she is in full possession of such reason as she has." Those who have sat for whole hours absorbed in the delight of watching over the slumber of some tenderly beloved one, whose waking eyes will smile for them, will doubtless understand the bliss and anguish that shook the colonel. For him this slumber was an illusion. The waking must be a kind of death, the most dreadful of all deaths. Suddenly a kid frisked in 2 or 3 bounds towards the bench and snuffed at Stephanie. The sound awakened her. She sprang lightly to her feet, without scaring away the capricious creature. But as soon as she saw Philippe, she fled, followed by her 4-footed playmate, to a thicket of elder trees. Then she uttered a little cry like the note of a startled wild bird, the same sound that the colonel had heard once before, near the grating, when the Countess appeared to Monsieur d'Albon for the first time. At length she climbed into a laburnum tree, ensconced herself in the feathery greenery, and peered out at the strange man with as much interest as the most inquisitive nightingale in the forest. "Farewell, farewell, farewell," she said, but the soul sent no trace of expression of feeling through the words, spoken with the careless intonation of a bird's notes. "She does not know me," the colonel exclaimed in despair. "Stephanie, here is Philippe, your Philippe, Philippe!" And the poor soldier went towards the laburnum tree, but when he stood 3 paces away, the Countess eyed him almost defiantly, though there was timidity in her eyes. Then at a bound she sprang from the laburnum to an acacia, and thence to a spruce fir, swinging from bough to bough with marvelous dexterity. "Do not follow her," said M. Fanjat, addressing the colonel. "You would arouse a feeling of aversion in her which might become insurmountable. I will help you to make her acquaintance and to tame her. Sit down on the bench. If you pay no heed whatever to her, poor child, it will not be long before you will see her come nearer by degrees to look at you." "That she should not know me, that she should fly from me," the colonel repeated, sitting down on a rustic bench and leaning his back against a tree that overshadowed it. He bowed his head. The doctor remained silent. Before very long, the Countess stole softly down from her high refuge in the spruce fir, flitting like a will-o'-the-wisp, but as the wind stirred the boughs, she lent herself at times to the swaying movements of the trees. At each branch she stopped and peered at the stranger, but as she saw him sitting motionless, she at length jumped down to the grass, stood awhile, and came slowly across the meadow. When she took up her position by a tree about 10 paces from the bench, M. Fanjat spoke to the colonel in a low voice. "Feel in my pocket for some lumps of sugar," he said, "and let her see them. She will come. I willingly give up to you the pleasure of giving her sweetmeats. She is passionately fond of sugar, and by that means you will accustom her to come to you and to know you." "She never cared for sweet things when she was a woman," Philippe answered sadly. When he held out the lump of sugar between his thumb and finger and shook it, Stephanie uttered the wild note again and sprang quickly towards him. Then she stopped short. There was a conflict between longing for the sweet morsel and instinctive fear of him. She looked at the sugar, turned her head away, and looked again like an unfortunate dog forbidden to touch some scrap of food while his master slowly recites the greater part of the alphabet until he reaches the letter that gives permission. At length the animal appetite conquered fear. Stephanie rushed to Philippe, held out a dainty brown hand to pounce upon the coveted morsel, touched her lover's fingers, snatched the piece of sugar, and vanished with it into a thicket. This painful scene was too much for the colonel. He burst into tears and took refuge in the drawing-room. "Then has love less courage than affection?" M. Fanjat asked him. "I have hope, Monsieur le Baron. My poor niece was once in a far more pitiable state than at present." "Is it possible?" cried Philippe. "She would not wear clothes," answered the doctor. The colonel shuddered, and his face grew pale. To the doctor's mind, this pallor was an unhealthy symptom. He went over to him and felt his pulse. M. de Sucy was in a high fever. By dint of persuasion, he succeeded in putting the patient in bed, and gave him a few drops of laudanum to gain repose and sleep. End of section 6. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.